I have a distinct pleasure to welcome all of you here in Białystok at the Faculty of Biology, University of Białystok, and this is for the first time when Poland hosts the International Grouse Symposium. It's a wonderful time for us after, well, 3 years of delay. First COVID, then war, and then we are all here. Wonderful, thank you for coming. And let us spend the first few minutes on introductory remarks, and since I hold the microphone, I'll do it first. Believe me, I was born in the city, and when I was a kid, just ardent bird lover. I used to take the first bus early in the morning on the outskirts of the city, and there were hundreds of black roses displaying there, just at the outskirts of the city. This was some 50 years ago. Just 20 kilometers from here, we had capercaillies displaying in the forest. You will visit this forest this afternoon. No more. Grouse are reduced in numbers everywhere, including Poland. The reasons why are complicated, as you see, and we will discuss this during this conference and probably on upcoming conferences as well. But we are here because we are very much concerned with this situation, for very many reasons. And just look around how strong this community of grouse lovers is. I truly believe that if we join the efforts, we will save the species, we will contribute to the conservation efforts carried out here in Poland and elsewhere. And I believe that if we will be stubborn enough, the logo of our conference, the capercaillie, will be around for the time being and for the hundreds of years to come. So with that, let me welcome and invite to the podium the Vice Rector of our university, Professor Francisca, who will offer a few words of welcoming remarks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of our rector, Robert Ciporowski, and myself, I warmly welcome you all to University of Białystok. It's my true honor and great pleasure to greet you here, especially here at Faculty of Biology, which is a special one, for sure. This conference is very important, and we are very glad it is organized in Poland, and especially it is organized at our university. We are very delighted that so many distinguished experts from many universities worldwide decided to come here. Thank you for your presence. I'm convinced that this symposium will be a great time to exchange knowledge, to indicate new direction of research, and also new direction of grouse protections. I suppose most of you have never been to Poland, and for sure never been to University of Białystok. If I can say a few words about our organization, may I?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mark. Our university was established 26 years ago. However, our history is much, much longer, as for many decades we were part of University of Warsaw, a branch of University of Warsaw. Although we are a pretty young organization, we are the quickest developed university in Poland. We are the biggest university in northeast part of Poland, and our mission is to conduct research and student education at the highest level. Altogether, we teach about 8,000 students, offering them more than 60 programs at bachelor and at master program. We also offer a wide range of postgraduate programs, being in line with our idea to be open university. I also would like to stress that we are the only one university in Poland with a branch abroad in Lithuania. We are mostly focused on teaching Polish minorities there. With regards to science, we have a lot of achievements, especially in biology, but also in chemistry, in physics, in law and history. We have a lot of conduct a lot of scientific projects and publish very good results in prestigious journals. The only one problem we have to meet right now is some difficulties with receiving grants, which is mostly due to geopolitical situation in East Europe. But going back to conference, I wish you fruitful discussion, I wish you nice meetings, and first of all, I wish you nice stay in Białystok, and we will do our best to stay comfortable. As you can see, we will order the best weather, and we can even imagine enjoy it. Thank you for organizing this team. I would like to also thank your team and I'm here, so it was good, great job, and I cannot even imagine how much effort you and the team put in organizing this conference.
Very nice. A true host of our event is the faculty. And so, because of this reason, with a great pleasure, I would like to invite to the podium the Dean of our faculty.
Good morning, everybody. You are early birds, like girls, because you start this conference before 9. It's unusual. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you at the Faculty of Biology at the University of Białystok. I would like to say that this place will be very comfortable for you. I'm sure you will meet friendly people, nice atmosphere, and of course, good weather. Let me express compliments to organizers, Marek, Dorota, and Aneta, for gathering together all specialists in growth, from ecologists to molecular scientists, but also practitioners, foresters, people working in the environmental protection institutions. This is a very big value to have all this kind of specialization together. Me myself, I'm a hydrobiologist, but all of us, we face exactly the same problems, like environmental pollutions, climate changes, water, groundwater decreasing. So I'm sure that this is the best place to discuss. I wish you good discussions, good atmosphere, new ideas for cooperation, maybe some solution for protection of growth. But also remember to enjoy your time here in Białystok, to enjoy our local food, local beer, and please feel safe, even if we are very close to Belarusian border. Enjoy your stay here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this event would not be possible without support of Polish state forests. On Thursday, you will visit the Galliformes Group district, where you will be firsthand seeing our efforts of reintroduction of cattle caring. And with that, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome to the podium the representative of the local directorate of the state forests, Mr. David Iwanek, please.
Welcome, everybody. I'm really pleased to welcome you in Białystok, but also in Regional Directorates of State Forests in Białystok. At the beginning, maybe I should say first word sorry, because it's the hardest thing to speak after such many dear previous speakers, but at least I try. As you see, I'm a forester, and as you can see on this here at this place, but also during whole each day, you will see many foresters in new uniforms like this, but also in uniforms for terrain. And maybe I will speak and tell you something about Regional Directorate of State Forest in Białystok. We are one of the 17th Regional Directorate in Poland, and many times we say that we are the special one. I hope you will spend great time in Białystok and also great time in forest in Regional Directorate State Forest in Białystok, and you will also have opportunity to say that yeah, they are really special, because we managed of over 600,000 area within 31 forest districts, and you will have field trip on Thursday, yes, on Thursday to one of our forest district. It's the Głęboki Brud Forest District. With me together is Chief Forester Piotr Karnasiewicz, and he will welcome you on Thursday. But I hope within this international conference, you will have time to speak with each other, to speak about problems that we know, but also to speak about the problems that we do not know, but maybe what they will appear in the future. Because forests that we manage show us that many endangered species needs to look after them, because if they will be left by their own in the nature, then some of them are not able to stay there for long. So have a nice time in our capital city of Białystok, but also have great time in our forest. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, I'm just a spokesperson to Aneta Książek, who is a real organizer of the event. Aneta, just if you can stand up so everybody would see her.
Great to meet all of you. And yes, we hope, I mean Marek, Dorota, Paweł, and rest of my colleagues, that this meeting here at my origin faculty of biology, but also this meeting in Białystok will be fruitful in an experience, but also will be fruitful in new connections and new scientific cooperation. Great time in Poland.
Thank you, Aneta. Dorota, please stand up just to show your face. This is yet another person you know from
Some of you, and I wish you very fruitful conference, good contacts and some kind of networking, and good stay in Poland. Thank you.
So these two ladies are true heroes, and they really carried out most of this hard work to bring us together today. And we are all at your service, so don't hesitate to approach us if there are any difficulties, any questions. This is a really safe place, though the war is raging just 200 kilometers something of Białystok. But here probably you will see some hints of it in Białowieża during your visit there, if you are willing to come on Saturday excursion. But otherwise, nothing really special happens here. We carry out the business as usual, and let's hope we'll stay that way for the future. Of course, this conference would not be possible without the concerted effort of the organizing committee, International Organizing Committee. Thank you all for your effort. Most of you are with us today And among the members of the committee, the one is very special, and this is Professor Ilse Storch, who will deliver the introductory lecture of our symposium. Ilse Storch works at the University of Freiburg, wonderful place in Germany, and she dedicated all her career to conservation and research on grouse. So I cannot think of anybody more fitting to deliver an introductory lecture to our symposium. Ilse was a lifelong researcher interested in the conservation and ecology of grouse in Europe. The situation of grouse in Europe is particularly dire. There are two factors, as you know, that are particularly difficult to handle. One is beyond our control, and this is global warming. The other one is human intrusion, and both of them are key factors of the reduction of the populations of grouse in Europe. But I would not tell anything more about it, because then I'll steal the show to Ilse. So with that, let me introduce you, Ilse, again, and invite you to the podium to deliver the lecture. Yes, the conversation.
Okay, yeah, this works. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, dear colleagues. And thank you, Marek, for this introduction and all the praise. And let's see if I can live up to your expectations here. Can you still hear me? No. We sorry.
Just a moment.
Okay. So this should work now. All right. So it's an honor to be invited here to give the first presentation, but it's also a challenge. And I'm grateful to the organizers for inviting me here and to kind of set the scene for this symposium. Perhaps they thought I'm well qualified in International Grouse Symposia, and yes, I guess I am, because I've attended 12 of the 15 symposia we've had so far. So perhaps this is the reason why I stand here as the first one of you this morning. And I think this symposium, this 15th, is special, is different from the ones that we have seen before, because this is the first one that will almost exclusively focus on conservation issues, both in situ and ex situ. And this is something that, as was also already mentioned by the introductory speakers, that will be most important here to think about grouse conservation during this week. So, well, I started out as a grouse researcher, focusing mostly on capercaillie a couple of decades ago, but today I'm a university professor teaching conservation biology. So we tell our students in conservation biology that conservation biology is providing the scientific basis for conservation practice, and we kind of make them believe that if we only do the research right, conservation success will almost inevitably follow. Well, I'd rather put a question mark here, and what I will do here this morning, and I thought this might be a good idea to open the discussions for this week, is to reflect about the research that we have been doing, the conservation biological research that we have been doing on grouse in the past decades, and how this has informed our conservation practice. So here's an outline of my talk this morning. I will spend a little bit of time on wildlife research trends in wildlife in Europe in general. Then, of course, we will have a look at the grouse. And I will then provide a short summary on research and conservation biological research on grouse as we use it as a basis for conservation, and also what conservation is doing with that. And finally, I will discuss why I think that conservation of grouse in Europe largely fails and come to some conclusions. All right, so wildlife research trends. We keep publishing papers in wildlife in general, in grouse research as well. And it's not only that we are seeing more and more being written on wildlife, but a couple of sophisticated new tools have also, I would say, improved the way that we collect and analyze data, because we have data with much higher resolutions, both in time and space, available. So I think, or I dare to say, that wildlife science in general has improved due to these technological advances, but also because we see a trend of more data sharing, of cooperative analysis of data across sites, which I think is particularly important to capture some of those large-scale processes that are ongoing. So multi-scale, multi-site analyses, and we also ask a bit more sophisticated questions, trying to understand the processes behind the patterns that we are observing. So better research, does this also lead to better or more conservation success? Before I try and answer, I want to give a little bit of background here on wildlife in Europe in general, particularly to the colleagues of North America, who might not be that familiar on what is ongoing in Europe. And you are right when your perception is that Europe is full of people, it's dominated by human land use. That's certainly true. But nevertheless, we have surprisingly many of the larger species of wildlife, as indicated just by this example here of the number of ungulate species and carnivore species that we have on this continent. And to add to this, quite a number of species, those larger ones, are increasing, are expanding their ranges. Most of the ungulate species are doing that. Roe deer, red deer, wild boar, and the map is indicating in green. Don't dare to press the wrong button here. So it's the green areas on the map that indicate places or parts of Europe where these species are expanding or have been expanding in the last few decades. Then species like the European beaver are re-established now across the continent, something that when I was a student, nobody would have believed would ever happen. And perhaps most amazing, the rapid recolonization of large carnivores, particularly the wolf here. So this is a camera trap picture taken by one of my students just outside Freiburg, Germany. And without those camera traps, we probably never have known that this wolf passed through. So wildlife in Europe is increasing, expanding, recolonizing. Is that because of good research? Well, probably not. And the colleagues here who have done who have looked in that in a bit more detail come to or conclude that there are basically three major causes of these wildlife trends. One is that our cultural landscapes are providing excellent habitat conditions for a couple of species, including the large herbivores. And high abundances of herbivores, of course, provide excellent conditions for recolonization of large carnivores. And this is basically what we are observing. So besides excellent habitat conditions, one very important aspect is that our societies are becoming more and more urbanized in their value systems, their attitudes. So Europeans are much more wildlife friendly than they used to be a few decades ago, and it's allowed to develop effective legal instruments that certainly allow or explain much of why large carnivores now have the chance to recolonize, why they do so. But yes, there are also species that are in trouble. Mostly species that are not easily coping, not able to adapt to the way we manage to dominate the landscape. And it's mostly those species that are sometimes considered or turned habitat specialists. And the grouse, the woodland grouse in particular, are right in there. And this is, of course, what I want to focus on this morning. So in temperate Europe, or now let's say in Europe altogether, we have 5 species of grouse, but I want to focus here on the woodland grouse species, so the capercaillie, the black grouse, and also the Afer grouse. And what is important to note is that the distribution has 2 different situations here in Europe. So all 3 species are widespread in the boreal forest, but they are extremely fragmented in temperate Europe. And this is also reflected in the conservation status globally and at a continental scale. Grouse are considered to be safe, although they are overall decreasing. But within the European Union, grouse are listed as threatened, as in danger of extinction. And this is also true, of course, at the national level. So most, if not all, European countries are listing grouse, all species of woodland grouse, as threatened. So this is the general picture here, more or less stable, even though Scandinavians will probably have examples of at least locally and regionally, perhaps not that stable populations, but overall, I think for the purpose of this talk, we can conclude that we have a stable situation, although fluctuating in the boreal forest. But in temperate Europe, regardless of which area you look at, numbers are going down. We are seeing range contractions, and there are also quite a number of examples of local extinctions. So I run you through each of, or provide one example for each of those different areas that I just showed, and let's start with the green situation here and up in the boreal forest in Fennoscandia. And I show you an example of a data set from Finland. That's the development of capercaillie densities, and I choose Finland because the Finns arguably have the best wildlife monitoring data of all, with the famous triangles, wildlife triangles. So what this indicates here is that there was a decline, a major decline between the 60s and the 80s, but after that, so since around 1990, despite fluctuations, the capercaillie numbers have remained at the same level. And this is assumed to also be the same for Sweden and Norway as well. And it also holds for different regions within Finland. And on the right side, these figures show the population trends for all 3 woodland grouse species in different parts of the range. So fluctuations, yes, this is typical for grouse, but overall a stable situation. When we move to the UK, the situation of the famous Caledonian pine forest capercaillie is not that promising. Numbers have been going down for a while, And the latest national survey here, so these dots in the middle are black columns. They indicate that the population, the overall population, is something like 550 in total. That's not just males, but total population size. And this is a drop by about 50% since the last national survey a couple of years earlier. European lowlands. In several countries, namely the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany, populations have already been lost, and restocking attempts are ongoing in several places with both black grouse and capercaillie. And a typical example here, data set, it's a data set on black grouse from the Rhön area in central Germany. And you see that the major decline here from the good old days before the 70s happened in around the 1970s. And then for a couple of decades, this isolated small remnant population managed to hang on somehow. But then around the year 2000 and a bit later, they started to decline again to a point where the mountain ranges, the situation is, similar perhaps. So we're seeing major declines, range contractions, and some populations already got lost. For the capercaillie in the, here is a data set from the Black Forest in Germany. That's after the Alps, the largest remaining distribution range for capercaillie in Germany. And you see that there is a sharp decline ongoing in the last 10 that started around the last 10 years. So the population on the French side of the border, that's the Vosges Mountains, so on the French side of the River Rhine Valley. Let's see. So that's this place here. Capercaillie were recently declared extinct, and in the Black Forest, the future probably will be a similar one, even though it might take a bit more time. In the Alps, the situation is still a bit better, simply, I'd say, because this is a larger distribution range. So we're starting from a situation with more birds, but also it's an area that, simply due to elevation, has more to offer to grouse. The trends are heterogeneous in space, so it depends on where you are. And I show you a data set here from France again that separates between or distinguishes between the central and the Central Alps and the pre-Alps, and what this is black grouse, and what this is showing that in general situation is stable in the Central Alps, in the center of the range, but declining and shrinking at the edges. Quite similar story in one of my study areas in the Bavarian Alps. This is a place at the very edge in the foothills on the northern slope of the Alps. And this is an area that, or the data set comes from an area that used to be one of the best capercaillie areas in the 1980s, 1990s, and a major. So these are counts of indirect sign here, and it's quite obvious that they are going down rapidly, and they started also around 15 years ago. And then finally, Southern Europe, the situation in the Pyrenees is not very positive, either on the Spanish nor on the French side. So on the left side, the data from Spain. On the right side, the data from capercaillie on the French Pyrenees, and this study suggests that extinction is likely in a few decades if the trends continue as they have been in the last 20 years. And last but not least, the southernmost Capricorn population and distribution range in the Cantabrian Mountains in Spain. I think the figure shows what's going on quite clearly. This population is certainly at the edge of extinction, and this is so despite major conservation efforts. So, pretty scary, don't you think? What is obvious for me in a situation like this, where all populations, all ranges, and all areas of temperature are going down in parallel, and this is a large-scale process that needs large-scale explanations. So it's unlikely that each and every of these populations have their own different factors behind these declines, but it's very likely that they have something in common, and we will hear more about this during the rest of the day. All right, so let's have a look for a while at the science that we have available for perhaps reversing these trends. Well, it's of course important to note that grouse are among the white-eyed taxa that are best studied. There's a lot of expertise also in this room, and the network has been kept together through the Grouse Symposia and also the IUCN Specialist Group. And yes, we do publish on grouse more than ever before. What I want to do now is to look at each of look at three different phases of grouse research that is relevant, that I consider relevant for conservation, as it has developed over time. And I think the foundations for conservation relevant studies on grouse have been laid in the 1980s, basically by perhaps those three gentlemen here that were my heroes of grouse research when I started out in the 1990s, who started to develop expertise in various parts or in various topics of grouse research. And the research that followed on their basis then in the 1990s set out to describe patterns of habitat use mostly, and many of these studies made use of telemetry, and we learned a lot from these studies, not only about habitat use, but also about spatial requirements, about metapopulation, connectivity, and so on. But these telemetry studies also suggested something that I like to call the habitat paradigm. And this is the observation that grouse obviously prefer the forest types they are adapted to. And this then means that changes in forestry, changes in land use practices will impact them mostly negatively. The most important factors here are habitat loss and fragmentation. This will bring about better opportunities, better chances for generalist predators, and consequently you will see reduced breeding success and survival. So in the last 20 years, and or 23 years by now, based on this habitat idea, this idea that habitat is central to grouse dynamics also, we as grouse researchers started to more ask the question of what are the mechanisms and processes behind these patterns that we observed using telemetry in the 1990s. And the perhaps most important insights from that research then was that everywhere in Europe it's apparently poor reproductive success, so too few chicks that is causing the declines that we are seeing. And The second and perhaps even more important point is that it's not simply habitat structure, but that it's the interactions between habitat and predation and also chick food that we need to look at and have perhaps not sufficiently understood. And I want to stress or pick out one study here that put this together, I think, in an excellent way. This is a major review by Yaren et al. That came out in 2016, and they have made an effort to analyze and look at growth dynamics in 16 different countries over 80 years. And this is basically what this review strongly suggested. So what is conservation practice then doing with those insights? Well, there's a lot of action plans and prescriptions, guidelines out there in each and every of the European countries, and they all are basically using or suggesting the same measures. And I will have a very quick look at each of them. So improving, restoring habitat structure. This includes measures that you all know, like mowing, burning, manipulating the forest structure, and so on. And this can work. This is well documented that grows after you create these or improve these structures, that grows use them, make use of them. But there is very little evidence that this has an effect at the population level. And this is what we would need in order to stop those declines. And one point here is, of course, that most of these measures, most of these habitat manipulations are project-based, they're small scale, and their implementation would be costly, if not completely unrealistic, where the aim would have to be to, or where they would work against natural succession or economic interests. So tell the foresters to open up the forest on a large scale, where they manage to, where they just struggle to make the forest more dense in order to make it climate change tolerant and so on, is probably not very promising. So one measure that does have an effect, can have effect, is to remove or mark fences, thinking that it's the major issue also, not only with deer fences, but also in ski resorts. And there's good examples by now from various parts of the range that this can significantly reduce adult mortality from collisions. But, and of course, this then will also mean that population level effects are likely, even though they are not yet well documented. Predator control, which means killing predators in order to improve the or increase the survival of growers. That's a typical element of most action plans. That this can have or is very likely to have a positive effect is well documented. But a recent review by a student of mine clearly showed that if predator control is to have an effect on grouse populations, then it has to be done rigorously with methods that are not legal in all of our countries and at an intensity that the public would probably not be happy to support. So this is one we should think about what we want to do here. Okay, hunting bans have been in place in parts of temperate Europe since the 1970s. The picture on the left shows an example of the good old days from an hunting estate in Austria. So no more. These hunting bans were can be, of course, effective where there is excessive hunting and poaching, but apparently hunting was not the cause of these declines, because populations continue to decline after the hunting bans were put into practice here. Then a big one in many parts of temperate Europe at least, is the efforts to reduce human disturbance from outdoor leisure activities. So the typical measures are closing and marking of trails and limiting access to particular areas. And local effects, again, are pretty well documented, that birds use those places that are set aside, but population level effects, again, are uncertain. And finally, restocking and reintroduction. I mentioned it already, that there are several projects, several attempts of restocking ongoing in several countries of Central Europe, but we have a long history here. Already in the 70s, the first attempts started, both with periodically and black grouse in Central Europe, mostly Germany, where thousands of captive birds were put out without any success. By now, then, translocations are favored in most cases, and also the much improved release techniques that you developed here in Poland helped a lot to get the birds fitter before they are put out. So translocation from Sweden and captive birds from Poland are released, at least that I'm aware of, several projects in Germany, Netherlands, and Belgium still now. However, there is still not a single example of a success, and as a success, I would go for a reversed negative population trend, and in the end, I would ask for a self-sustaining, stable population that is able to survive without constant human interference. So that's where we want to get at, and if this is the way to go, should be or will be a matter of debate during this week. So yes, it's certainly seen as a last resort to avoid extinction. And my impression is that many of these decisions, these projects are started by local enthusiasts who put a lot of effort into these actions, and often also against very low chances of success. So why is it that grouse conservation overall seems to be failing? Why have we not managed to reverse the negative trends in not even a single population so far? Well, the literature suggests that there are three general causes that are out there for conservation failures. One is poor research, that we perhaps asked the wrong questions, poor knowledge transfer, or poor societal support. Before I try and answer, I'll show you a few quotes. Already 12 years ago now, Becker and Rothstadt wrote that contrary to the habitat paradigm, so contrary to many beliefs, their long-term results from Norway indicate that grouse are much more tolerant to forest structure than previously believed. And it's actually the predators that play the most important role in regulating grouse numbers. So to focus on habitat structure only is not the right way to go. So they wrote it about 12 years ago, but still now, and here I quote a well-seasoned colleague from the UK, it's not Robert, by the way, who is saying, well, everyone still argues chick survival is the problem, but everyone is still meddling with habitat and believes that this will save the day. And a colleague about the same age class of researchers, so well experienced from France, was saying that yes, survival of young adults is the problem, but the administration, so the decision makers, rely exclusively on habitat structures. And this agrees very much with what I experienced myself in the Alps and in Germany, that habitat structure seems to be simply a convenient and easy measure. So rather to do something than to do something complicated. So despite these several decades of failures in grouse conservation, conservationists continue to focus on small-scale habitat structure. So why is this so? Yes, there are certainly some research gaps, perhaps also some points where we get the wrong suggestions. It's still unclear how habitat structure and chick food, insects for chicks, and predation interfere and are mediating each other. And perhaps we also gave a few wrong or misleading signals here, because we tended to focus on our individual relatively small study areas rather than by drawing the big picture as the Galliformes review study did. Then yes, there are certainly delays until the manager decision makers do not necessarily read the latest papers every day. And I also say, yes, there is not the best societal support when you keep in mind that conservation measures that perhaps other than habitat manipulations often conflict with other societal goals or interests, and particularly also the economic interests of forestry, for example. Okay, but there's one important point that is missing here. And this is that we are seeing a large-scale loss in habitat suitability in temperature. And this is largely, if not exclusively, related to climate change. We know that climate change is causing major range shifts. It's well documented already for quite a number of plant and animal species. And we also know that these uphill shifts that follow from that might drive relict populations that depend on certain conditions into extinction simply because the mountains are not high enough. And this is what is projected for grouse as well. Grouse are expected to shift north and move uphill in the mountainous areas. And such upslope elevational shifts are already documented for black grouse in the Alps, and they're also indicated for Cap-Caillie. Here are data from Switzerland, and the left figure, the blue line, is showing the elevational uphill shift in black grouse observations in the foothills. So they're already now black grouse occur quite a bit higher up than they used to do, while in the Central Alps, where they occur at much higher elevations, this effect is not that pronounced yet. And the figure on the left is a modeling exercise, or the results of a modeling exercise, and this indicates that even in the mildest climate scenarios, this uphill shift in grouse niches and grouse habitats will continue. And to make this a little bit more concrete, I show you how the vegetation is changing in some of these low elevation areas already now. This is the same site in the place where I did my Capricelli telemetry work around 1990. And you see what is going on here. So the deciduous trees are taking over in the next generation of trees, and the tall forbs and ferns, and also a lot of rubus is dominating what used to be a vaccinium, and the Capricelli are going down accordingly. So with all this, it's likely that grouse are disappearing from most of temperate Europe, perhaps not everywhere, so I'm quite hopeful for the central parts of the Alps. This is also suggested by simulations as published here in the Climatic Atlas of European Birds. And sadly, also restocking and reintroductions will not reverse this trend. So to summarize, I think we can say that overall we have good understanding of grouse population dynamics. Yet grouse continue to decline, so something doesn't match here. And this large-scale decline is likely driven by large-scale environmental changes. And this is why grouse conservation so far is failing dramatically. We simply don't get there. We are not able to stop the factors behind that, at least at the large European scale. And this is because the small-scale conservation action that we put so much effort in to put into practice are unlikely to reverse those trends. So my conclusions here are that as researchers, we should focus to understand better how climate change and vegetation changes interact and how they affect grouse demographic parameters. Conservationists, I think, should focus more on those areas where grouse stand a chance. So areas that are likely to maintain habitat suitability for grouse also under climate change. And finally, I also think, and this is something that I really would like to put forward here during this week, that we need a debate what to conserve under what conditions. So is it right, is it justified to try to save grouse against all odds, even where the chances of success are extremely large? So this is a question that I would like to put up here for this week, and I'm very much looking forward to learn your views here in Poland and all the great efforts and the great successes that you have had and that you have with the rearing and release techniques. And I'm looking forward to discuss these issues with all of you during this week and also during the expressions. Thank you.
Not run away.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you very much for a really thoughtful and thorough presentation, very inspiring, and I think also a bunch of questions that should be asked. Actually, you asked the question, so let's wait for the responses in 15 minutes. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, well, there's a lot of things I was going to bring up, but I'm going to stick with just one of them, and that's the issue of scale. Because one of the things, when I look at what has happened in North America, we do have examples of where things have happened that are different than what you see in Europe. But the biggest single reason is the issue of scale. We're talking about, like for example, in British Columbia, where climate change issues, like you talked about, are dramatic, with pine beetles, wildfire, and clear cutting. you get a change from a forest grouse to spruce grouse to sharp-tailed grouse, which is a prairie grouse. So it's a pretty dramatic illustration of some of what you're talking about. But the scale at which this is happening in British Columbia is so large that what you see is an absolute explosion of sharp-tailed grouse in these areas. So if your goal is to conserve sharp-tailed grouse, you're being really successful. If your goal is to maintain some sort of stable spruce grouse population, you're obviously unsuccessful, at least in the short term.
Thank you. So this was more a comment than a question. Very fitting one. Any other questions, please? See, if I may first remark shortly and then ask you a question. There is some inconsistency in your presentation, I must admit, at least to myself. And I'm just alluding to the efforts of reintroduction by rearing in captivity. What we do is to release the birds that are, let's say, 3-4 months old. So in principle, these birds should be old enough to really make themselves comfortable in the environment. So this the highest peak of mortality is already over. So why is this still failing when we are releasing the birds that supposedly are fitting to the environment?
Well, I think I'm not the one to answer this one, but I hope for finding an answer here from the Polish colleagues and perhaps also the excursions. Yeah.
I'll tell you up front, we don't have an answer. We are just observing this unfortunate pattern, and of course that's, I think, the key question that we have to answer. If we know the reasons, then I think we can at least locally try to remedy the problem.
So what I have not mentioned in the presentation, but what I think is important in this context is that according to, of course, we are not the first ones to have these kind of questions. So there are the IUCN reintroduction guidelines that are the outcome of many clever and experienced people working in reintroductions, and they have formulated under which circumstances or conditions, reintroduction of whatever species are justified. And one very key factor here, very key question, is that the causes of the decline and the extinction of the natural population must be understood, and those factors must no longer be acting in order to justify a reintroduction. That means we should know why the natural population goes down, and we should know that we have stopped those factors. And then it makes sense to put out birds from elsewhere. And this is probably exactly, I guess, where we are, that we have not sufficiently understood for each of those remnant fragmented populations. Why is the suitability or the carrying capacity for these birds no longer there? And if that is the case, then it's no surprise that the best you can put out, the fittest birds you can ever produce, and that will not make a change, will not much of a change. That would be my working hypothesis here. Let's put it like this.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, please, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Richard from RSPB in Scotland, and we've recently started a project undertaking what we think of as large scale, although in many other contexts it'd be quite small scale, hundreds of hectares of cutting of heather and also of grazing with cattle of heather. And that's off the back of work done by Ron Summers and Mark Hancock in the past at Abernethy Forest. And I really take the point around the cutting that economically in the long term it's probably not a viable solution. It's very expensive, it's quite inefficient. But the cattle grazing, working with local farmers, I think is potentially economically beneficial to the local area. And we started to see some positive effects on the capercaillie population, at least locally where we've been grazing. So I think my question really is whether these management techniques, potentially where they can be economically viable, could help to mitigate the vegetational changes caused by climate change. So the cattle grazing kind of reverses the two pictures that you put up. It puts the 2022 version back toward the 1992 version, and that's something that I think we're aiming at. So yeah, do you think that potentially grazing could help to mitigate impacts of climate change?
Well, if the grazing again produces structures, so changes structures. So if those structures that result from the grazing then provide all that the grouse need, including, for example, insect food, then yes, why not? And I think the example of the heather moorland management for red grouse in Scotland is a good example of habitat management that can be economically viable, because there is a strong economic interest, namely grouse shooting, behind that. But this was my point. In many places, we try to manipulate the habitat against the interest of the landowners, against the interest of, in case of woodland grouse, of forestry, who want to save the forest for climate change and don't want to open it up and so on. So there's certainly conflicts, but where you get these interests together, I think that might be a good chance. But structure it's good to look at, or to try to get structures right, but the right structures will not automatically provide for the trophic interactions. So you might get the perfect structure, but if there are no insects, or insects at the wrong time, it won't work.
Thank you.
Other questions? If not, I have one. Still, and this is well, and this will go beyond, let's say, the solid science. This is more observation. I'm an ardent nature photographer, and for many years I was trying to approach grouse on many conditions, and probably you agree with me. This is extremely shy group of birds. They are really afraid of any threat that they, at least whatever they sense as a threat. And let me contrast this with the cranes. Cranes were on the brink of extinction in Poland some 20 years ago. Really, seeing a crane, even in this very part of Poland, was rare occasion. And all of a sudden, something happened. The crane numbers are just skyrocketing. We have them all over the place. And the difference I see with regard to the crane is that now the birds are really tolerating people. You can approach them not very close, but close enough to not only to take a satisfying photo, but also to just observe the birds. And this is, I think, this behavioral trend is really very, very distant. So whatever happens with the cranes gives me some, let's say, hint of maybe that perhaps what might happen with the grouse is some change of the behavior, probably due to the bottleneck and the very strong selection pressure towards those individuals that will be more tolerant to the environment. With that, I don't agree fully with one of your conclusions that these birds are so tolerant to the habitat change. I don't think this is the case, but that's my personal observation.
Of course, there are limits to what degree of habitat change they can tolerate, of course. So these were research results for Norway, for the boarding force. But to just briefly respond to this issue of behavioral changes, I think one important aspect here is whether, you're talking about tolerance to humans, right?
Yes, yeah, sure.
Photographers and so on.
Just
So one issue here for a clever animal, of course they are able to learn and they use their experience. And species that used, people as hunters for a long time of their, perhaps even evolutionary history, but certainly also their own biography, it's clever to be shown. And we see that in the Alps as well, that particularly in those areas where we had hunting bans for more than 50 years now, where there's a lot of tourists, where they see a lot of harmless people, and all the people that they see are harmless in their experience, so the perceived risk of humans is low. And we come to the Black Forest and you can observe some of those periodically at close range. So these effects are there, and I just take this opportunity to advertise for a talk by Farina Sot. She's over there, student of mine. She's working exactly on those effects of hunting history on grouse behavior for her PhD. So there will be a presentation this afternoon. So I think that's we will see.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll get my answer. Yes, please.
No. I have a question not exactly related to Capercaillie, but you said we have a good overall understanding of growth dynamics. What do you mean we? We are thinking about small group of scientists and people who are exactly involved in environmental protection. Do we educate enough young people? I think the young people are focused on their mobile phone, not on environmental protection. What do you think about?
That might be true, but what I meant is, first of all, we as a community in this room, so the grouse researchers, based on what we have published. So this is knowledge that are scientific results that are available publicly to everyone. But I also said, yes, there are also timelines in knowledge transfer. So even though the best papers might be available, open access on the internet, this does not mean that all the conservationists or the decision makers will read them. So there's certainly also some need for work at this transition between research and conservation planners, conservation practice, to make the results better known and to do more, say, overview studies on particular issues. So the general public certainly does not, I would not say that the general public has a good understanding of grouse ecology, but I wouldn't expect that either.
We are running out of time, meeting our coffee break. So with that, thank you, Ilse, for a wonderful lecture. Coffee is waiting for you outside, so please reconvene here